All right, and we are live streaming to X, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. Welcome to the Injective community, as well as the greater sort of Web3 crypto. Hopefully we have some Web2, community members joining us today. But super excited for this episode. We have so many things to kind of dive in here. I first want to kind of welcome everyone here. We have Rich from the Google Cloud team. We have Mirza as well as myself from the Injective side of things. And before I hand it off to these two guys, I'll just do a quick intro of myself. I'm Rocky. I lead ecosystem marketing here at Injective. I do things like this webinar as well as spaces and other things behind the scenes. And then I also have my colleague here, Mirza. And so Mirza, if you want to give a quick intro on yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Mirza. I run the business team here at Injective. I've been here for 5 years now, which feels crazy to say. But yeah, excited to chat about all things Google and Injective.
Love it. And then Rich from the Google Cloud team. Rich, do you mind giving a quick intro to everybody?
Sure, and thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and talk about what we're doing with Injective. So my name's Rich. I run our global strategy and operations for the Web3 team, and founded that team at Google just about 4 years ago today. Which feels like, I guess 4 dog years, right? 30 years in crypto. But I work on, leading our product strategy efforts as well as thinking through our partnership strategy with a number of the leading protocols in the space, and excited to talk about what we're doing with Injective.
Perfect. And so with that being said, obviously we did have an announcement here a few months ago with Google Cloud, sort of running a validator and doing those sorts of things. Mirza, do you mind just giving the viewers kind of a rundown, a recap of sort of what we've already announced with Google Cloud?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess Google and us have had a long-standing relationship. I think we switched over from AWS almost 4 years ago now. I think Google was very early to the Web3 game in general, like probably around the time Rich joined, where there was just a lot more hands-on support, a lot more Web3 developer efforts. Even before Web3 became trendy, I think back in 2020, 2021, no one really was touching Web3. But Google had a dedicated team for Web3, which was pretty special in my opinion, when it was just underrated as an industry. So yeah, became really good friends with them over the years, know a lot of the team members really well. And we started to formulate how can we sort of expand this relationship beyond just sort of Injective using Google Cloud services, right? And Google was sort of foraying into a lot of different areas, and Rich can probably speak to it way better than I can. But with a lot of the larger projects, they were starting to launch things like validators. They had only done it with, I would say, like 3-4 chains, if I'm not mistaken, so very few. So I was always interested in that because what's special about Google, in my opinion, compared to other enterprises, is Google is actually running the actual infra stack for the validator operations. A lot of other enterprises you see will sort of punt it off to a white label solution and just put their logo on it, but not really run the validator. But Google very painstakingly will set up all of the nodes and actually make sure that they have proper uptime and are running the proper infrastructure, right? So it's not just a sign of credibility, but it also is probably one of the most secure providers out there, right? Like what can be more secure than one of the largest cloud providers in the world securing your chain? So that's one part of it. But I would say that's the tip of the iceberg for what this collaboration is and why I was so excited about it, because we also announced Google is now hosting a Injective Faucet. So for instance, when developers want to come and onboard, the first thing people often always need is gas tokens. So where do you get gas tokens? It's always sort of sometimes a convoluted process, especially if you're a Web2 dev who's not familiar with faucets. But Google hosting that allows anyone coming in to Injective or wanting to build on Injective to get gas tokens or testnet tokens directly from this faucet, which just makes the onboarding experience a breeze, right? And it goes beyond that. Google also started working on a developer portal. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they had started off with just hosting ETH and Solana, but maybe Rich can correct me. So we were very excited about that specifically because we want to appeal to Web2 devs. I think it's underrated. Web3 is sort of this like very niche community, and that's great. I love being part of niche communities, but if we want to expand, we need to get more Web2 devs in here. So having that developer portal, having actual learning resources like, hey, what is a blockchain? What is Injective? Why should I build here? Having someone like Google host that with us is great for developers being able to onboard. So I would say it's a two-pronged effort, right? This collaboration. It's one, Google hosting our actual chain, helping to run that chain from a validator perspective, and also helping to host injective data sets through things like BigQuery. But the second prong of it is just allowing developers to onboard Web2 devs, Web3 devs through the developer portal, through the Faucet. So that's sort of the collaboration in a nutshell. I'm probably glossing over many of the details, but that's it on a high level.
You're doing a better job than I would have, Mirza. So like, I think it was, that was great. I maybe just want to piggyback off of a couple of those things, because I think, you know, a lot of times when we work with protocols, there's always a question of why. And the investments that we're making as a team, right? When you think about the developer portal, right? You think about the faucets, these are really efforts that are focused on the builder community. And so our big thrust for the last, I would say, you know, 3 or 4 years, and, you know, going all the way back to when we built the team, was, you know, what are the things that we can do in this space that are analogous to the things that we have done in other broader technology trends? So if you look at the developer community on AI, you look at the developer community in mobile, you look at the developer community in cloud, we felt like we actually had an opportunity to really up-level what we were seeing in the Web3 developer community, that, as you mentioned, was largely, I think, considered niche, and then also underserved from the other developer organizations that would typically play a major role. And so, like, we saw, obviously, when we work with you guys, that focus on the developer demand and adoption, not just crypto developers, but we'll call it like Web2 or non-crypto native developers, as being a key focus. And, you know, there's obviously strategic alignment between us in that regard. And then maybe the other thing that I'll add here is, you know, when we talk about Web2 developers, you know, what does that mean? Like, right now, the developer portal that we've built out is doing, you know, millions of hits on every 30-day period, right? I think when we first rolled it out, it was like we're getting a couple 100,000. Now we're upwards of 4 million. And we know, like, if you look at the Electric Capital reports and kind of all the trends, we know that the developer community in Web3 is certainly a lot smaller than 4 or 5 million. At least based on those reports. And so what we're excited about is actually bringing these two worlds together, where we say, hey, we have some really interesting technology and this open source community that's built and really incubated by the protocols who've done really the hard work of that cold start problem, right? How do you seed a new community and a new technology from scratch? And then trying to bring in this, we'll call it like the Google native, potentially the Google native developer community, whether crypto native or not, into that space. And that's really what we're excited to see, is like, what happens when you bring those two things together. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity to see the value add that comes from working very closely with protocols like Injective, and then leveraging some of the more familiar surface areas that Google has, whether it's the developer portals or some of the newer things that we're doing alongside like faucets.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that background. And I think that gives, you know, the community a good idea of sort of our collaboration, as well as, you know, some of the ideas that have kind of come to the forefront, you know, in the last few years. Rich, I'm curious, you know, from the Google Cloud side, you know, obviously, again, you guys are just this Web2 behemoth. What was sort of the inspiration, or you know, why get involved in Web3 to begin with, right? I mean, you have such a wide, I think, customer base and developer base that is already, again, Web2. Why not just double down on Web2 and continue to kind of push that sort of category?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I think there's a little bit of, you know, kind of my own personal take on this, like why I was really invested in it when I joined Google. And then there's probably, you know, kind of the company position and what we thought was interesting there, which I kind of teased that a little bit in my last answer. I mean, for me, I had got into crypto in 2017, and I came at it, I was actually a financial services enforcement lawyer. So I was working with a lot of the early founders and saw, you know, really firsthand one of the, you know, the excitement, but also the challenges of building these open source protocols. And when I talked to other lawyers, what became very clear to me at that time was um, this whole movement around crypto wasn't just about moving value on chain and some of the realizing the promise of things like Bitcoin and these decentralized protocols. It wasn't just about that. It was also reframing how developers and founders would innovate. In other words, building a crypto company looks very, very different than building Facebook or what it looked like to build Instagram or kind of what we'll call like the social media technology companies that sort of just predated the crypto boom. And I think that there's like, when I joined Google, there was a really interesting trend that I saw, which is Google does a really good job of trying to anticipate not just what will get built, but how it will get built. And then they put themselves in the developer's shoe. And I thought that that was an area that was frankly just underserved in the market. And so when I joined Google, it just seemed obvious to me that if someone could play a key role in helping this technology metastasize and reach critical mass, there was really no better place to do that than within Google and within Google Cloud specifically. So that was like, that's sort of where it blended with the company position, which is, my view was like this technology really was going to be transformational. And I viewed open source as being something that was going to be more heavily leveraged by developers tomorrow than it was yesterday. And crypto is really bringing a lot of that to life. But then in addition to that, there were certain areas where I thought Google could play a really key role. I mean, there's a lot of people pitched, we'll call it like a crypto strategy at Google before, myself and James Tromans, right? Like before we made the pitch for our team, there had been everything from crypto-based payments to putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet to launching, our own coin, and all interesting ideas. But I think it was the idea that we had tapped into this developer excitement and this trend of, again, not just what we build, but how we build it. And that fundamentally changing that really, I think, caught the attention of our leadership and is really what got a lot of the buy-in. And I think that's where we're naturally well positioned to do something unique, right? If we had done any of those other things, there's a lot of companies that have launched a coin, that have put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, that have gotten involved in crypto payments. And I don't necessarily know that Google adding yet another version of that would have been all that helpful for the space overall. But I do know that, like, by working on the developer side, there was an opportunity to kind of take what was good about Google and push it out into the developer ecosystem in a way that probably adds more value to the communities that we partner with, adds more value to the crypto community. But I think that's like the whole ethos of Web3 is like contributing more than you extract. And so that was like a key component for me as well strategically, is like, could we do this in a way that was, again, in line with the crypto ethos, as opposed to potentially sort of turning it into, like, I don't know, like we'll call it like an enterprise chain, which I think is one of the big concerns I had as well.
That's really interesting, sort of all the things that sort of Google Cloud considered behind the scenes, right? That never saw the light of day, but really interesting that you kind of decided on this Web3 portal and to kind of really double down on that. Pivoting a little bit, before we kind of, went live here, we were talking a little bit about kind of the intersection of blockchain and AI. And obviously that's been a big theme, I think, for the last, call it 6+ months, maybe even longer. But, I really want to kind of focus in here a little bit for a few minutes. And Mirza, do you mind just giving us kind of the community a rundown on, where you see the intersection of blockchain and AI and how Injective is sort of, I guess, targeting those users and really sort of building the future at that connection point?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think even before the hype around AI, it's always been something that people have been working towards. It's not something that magically appeared when OpenAI and ChatGPT came out. I think the first AI boom, actually, if I remember correctly, was back at around 2011 or 2012. And then there was sort of a lull, and it was taken over by like VR and AR and all this other stuff. But now AI is back. But in my opinion, it never really left. There's been a lot of work being done behind the scenes. I think crypto is in an interesting position where we're always at the frontier of new tech, right? Just by virtue of being in this industry, where anytime that there's any new type of technology being developed, there's someone out there who's trying to figure out, hey, how can we embed this with crypto? Or how can this make sense, right? And we saw this many times, right? Like with DPIN previously, et cetera. Whenever something is getting hot, people try to see like, oh, is there like a use case in crypto? And I think AI is in a very similar stage where it's extraordinarily nascent, in my opinion, where the vast majority of AI you see in crypto is just ChatGPT wrappers, right? Where people are experimenting and seeing like, okay, how can we bring AI and crypto together, make development easier for people? A lot of because what people often miss is it's a very, very complicated technology, like way beyond my pay grade. And people just think it happens overnight, like, oh, blockchain and AI can work together symbiotically, and like great things will happen, but it takes years and years. So I'm actually very excited that people are making things like ChatGPT wrappers or other tools that make development easier. And that's how we honed in on it here at Injective, where we realized, okay, like what's our blockchain about? It's a blockchain that helps people build faster, right? Especially finance or DeFi apps. So we created a number of different modules similar to what you have on like a WordPress or a Wix that give you templates to make development easier. So when we thought about how we can combine AI with this, we thought about it from specifically that perspective. What we said is, okay, what's really hot right now? It's ChatGPT, and people are using ChatGPT as an information flow. Like it's pretty much replaced your everyday search engine for many people, where it's like, okay, I just use ChatGPT to find answers to questions. So what we actually did is we created a platform called iAgent, where we fed in all of the data from Injective. So from the Injective blockchain, from our documentation. So now when developers want to search anything about Injective, it's like, okay, help me build a lending application on Injective. It will literally walk you through step by step how to do it, how to deploy it. It will point you to the right GitHub repos, because all of that data has been embedded into this platform. And more so, we thought about, okay, what do people want to do? And if they're not developers, right? So a lot of people come into crypto wide-eyed and they want to experiment with these tools, but maybe they don't know how to program, they don't know how to code. So there's also simple functions you can call, such as help me launch a new market on the Injective blockchain. So let's say you want to launch a new token, you can actually mint it through this sort of natural language commands, and it will mint that token and create a market for it. So that's where the experimentation started. And weirdly enough, it was a hit, so much so that and we'll get into it in a bit, we saw a lot of traction for that product, where people were just coming in, launching markets, launching new products. And we experimented with it ourselves. A big initiative we have internally is RWAs, or like real world assets. So one of the first indices we launched was one that combined sort of different AI tokens and different AI stocks together. So the top 5 AI stocks and the top 5 AI tokens, like BitTensor, et cetera. And we actually used iAgent to launch that market. We literally gave it the commands of like, hey, this is how you should weigh the index, and this is how you should launch it, which was really exciting. And people saw that example and that demo video and were creating their own markets. And that's why we decided later on and we'll get into it later in the conversation, to launch an AI-focused hackathon, because we're like, wow, people are actually experimenting and building DeFi apps using these toolings. So anyways, I know that answer was a little long-winded, but the TLDR is, I think like we're still very, very early at this intersection. I think it's a very grandiose goal, but I think brick by brick, crypto is chipping away at this intersection.
Yeah, I'll maybe just add like one. I think Mirza hit all the right points there. Because crypto is, as he mentioned, oftentimes the developer community is already at the frontier of a lot of this technology. I think it actually, I don't necessarily know what it will look like, but I think crypto certainly has a head start as it relates to these kinds of like broader use cases for artificial intelligence. I mean, just like take, for example, take payments, right? Every crypto developer has been thinking about payments in the application experience since they got into the space, because that was really, I mean, from Bitcoin to here, it really was about peer-to-peer payments. And once you have a common protocol, right, and you have an ability to move money in a borderless way, in a programmable way, that's great for humans. It's fantastic for agents. It's almost like, I mean, I was telling somebody the other day, it's almost like blockchains weren't built for people. It's like they were built for agents and AI. And the reason for that is like, right now there isn't a solution that is readily available off the shelf that allows me to make a payment with an agent of mine and a credit card or a Visa card or something like that. But it is far easier, and there are demos all over the place about using some MCP, connecting my agent to a wallet, and making a payment in stable coins. Actually, there was a really great demo I saw the other day of somebody just human readable language saying, hey, buy me some office snacks. And there's some stuff that happens in the background, but ultimately it's an agent with a wallet that has a stable coin that's going and placing an order on Amazon. And there's a couple of hops there that need to happen, but the movement of value is like something that crypto has a head start on. And so I'm very excited to see how the developers in this space use that head start. And it's one of the things that we always see in these hackathons is folks thinking about that as it relates to financialized use cases, whether it's like trading and DeFi, or even for what I would call like arguably non-financialized use cases and payments, where it's, hey, I'd like to have a micro subscription to a service. And right now that doesn't particularly exist because the buying journey is very different than it will be under a situation where we have like agentic commerce. But I see that happening in crypto far faster than it will happen with traditional banking rails. And so all the things that Mirza mentioned are absolutely right, but I think we also have this fantastic head start when it comes to unlocking the value of AI that will take the rest of, we'll call the traditional payment space, months, if not years, to catch up on.
Yeah, very well put. And I do just want to give, kind of a shout out to, we did have Chris Nyland from the Agent Space team during our AI Agent Hackathon. So definitely, appreciate his contributions, but also I think that's a pretty exciting initiative that you guys have going on over at Google Cloud. Moving on to maybe other initiatives. Rich, can you maybe give the audience a bit of a maybe insight, on some of the sort of initiatives sort of upcoming from the Google Cloud side? Obviously, you can be sort of more generalized, you don't need to be very specific, but yeah, any insight on like what can people expect next from, whether that's the Web3 portal, whether it's kind of new features or new use cases that both users and developers can kind of take advantage of?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe a couple things. Some of this I'm hinting in these broader answers about where I see the space going. And so I'll leave that where it is. I do think there are a number of things that are happening across the company that we're starting to look at and say, hey, like what could this look like in a Web3 specific context? So for example, we just launched an agent to agent protocol that's been getting a lot of really positive traction. And there's some questions about, okay, thinking about the crypto native use cases, thinking about the comments I just made on payments. Are there ways to leverage this A to A protocol in a way that brings to life some really interesting use cases on chain? The other area that I think is, perhaps maybe more near term and might be more real for the developer community is, so right now the portal has got, constructed in a couple ways. We have offerings from ourselves and partners that are related to node infrastructure. We have our faucets, which now includes Injective. And then we have like a learning portal. And recently we've added an AI sort of tab in the hamburger bar where you go to that. And we're now experimenting with, how do we get this model, which is essentially, a version of Gemini that has been arguably like trained up on Web3 specific contexts. How do we get this AI to become more helpful to developers? There's a couple of areas where that becomes possible. I mean, MCP makes things really interesting because I can automatically say, okay, well, just like I might ground a query to an LLM in Google search, like, sort of like what you see with deep research and some of these other functionalities that are coming to the LLMs. Can I ground this model in in on-chain, like real-time on-chain data. So can I have it query the blockchain live by creating an API endpoint that allows the LLM to interact with an RPC node and basically say, hey, tell me, fetch the latest block on Ethereum. And that's something that you can do today on the portal. Is like you can ask our agent, like, hey, what's the latest block on Ethereum? It'll give you the latest block, with a timestamp and everything. I think that becomes really important for the developer community in crypto, largely because, again, we have a head start because the data is essentially transparent, immutable, and it's written in real time on chain. So it can be consumed in real time. But in addition to that, the real time use cases are far more valuable than what I would call like the static use cases. So, you ask like, oh, which country has the largest geographical border, like, contiguous. Okay. And, that's historical. It's not really going to change unless the global map changes aggressively, which I don't anticipate happening, hopefully. But like if you're asking, for example, hey, I'm seeing a recent trend live in real time, could be an asset price movement. It could be inflows to a particular protocol or outflows. And you want to know the reason for that. There are a couple of data points that you can imagine an AI model would want to query or look at to come up with some sort of a conclusion. All of those data points would be real time. They would have to be almost like tip of the chain. And so that's another area where we're really, focusing our efforts is how do we equip any model? Obviously, we're working with Gemini, but how do we equip any model with some of the tools that will allow it to become more on-chain native? And so I talked about payments before. This is on the data analytics side. You could continue to kind of go down this where, we have a vision where right now, I think the faucet is akin to the, the Raptor engine analogy. Like most faucets look like the left side of the Raptor engine where it's just all messy and it's like, got all this wiring everywhere and it's really confusing. And then, after 3 years or 4 years of SpaceX focusing on it's very clean, the newest version of the Raptor engine is this very clean, like elegant design. I think our faucet is really at that point when you look at ours versus the others in the community for a number of reasons. But what I would love to have is even like optimize it further. Instead of clicking the drop down, like we should have a situation where somebody comes to the portal and perhaps the only thing they see is that little prompt bar. And they say, hey, I'm interested in building on some chains. I'd like to drip some testnet crypto. Let me know which chains I should be building on. Like, give me a point of view. Maybe where is there more DEX activity, right? This goes back to the real-time feed. And then it's, okay, I've picked my chain. Okay, I'm gonna build something in DeFi, so I'm gonna use Injective. Can you just drip some testnet Inj to my wallet? And the AI would just say, okay, drop your wallet address here in the prompt. You drop the prompt, and then like it's doing all of that for you. And it's simply the model calling the API as opposed to the user individually clicking. And then you can see like where that goes from there. Because then you could say, okay, to Mirz's point, I really want to build an on-chain application. I'd be interested in building a DEX. Can you help me like build out the smart contract language? I'm not familiar with that. Okay, yeah, here's the language for that. Okay, can we make sure that compiles? Sure. Can we deploy that to the testnet? Yes. You need some testnet Inj. Where am I going to pull that from? Oh, I pull it from this wallet. And then you have like a full life cycle happening almost entirely without the need to go into like a command line prompt or even really have more than a rudimentary understanding of the code. And that to me is where I think most development will go. But again, I think because of the nature of crypto and how open source it is, and also what the foundations are doing to facilitate this, keeping these open composable elements out in the ecosystem, I think it's likely to happen within the next, couple of years, where that's the developer experience. So it's a big focus for us. Like, I think just to kind of give you a sense of really taking the portal and turning it into not just a one-stop shop generally for the crypto native folks, but also making it the destination of choice for Web2 developers who are saying, hey, I'm interested in building in crypto, but like, I don't know the first thing about a faucet. I don't know the first thing about running smart contracts. I don't know the first thing about a lot of these kind of native instruments, and having the model almost remove the friction really from that experience for them. If we can unlock that, I think it'll be massive. And naturally, like, this is why we partner with protocols like Injective, right? This is the focus for us, is we can provide part of that experience. There's the other part of that experience, which is like, what are they building on? What are they building with? That tooling comes from the foundations.
Very exciting, Rich. Yeah, I think that dropped enough detail for people to kind of understand sort of where things are going. And that's, I think, a really good segue. Mirza, I'd love to loop you into this conversation and basically just ask, what gets you most excited working with Google Cloud, and, where are the use cases that you think are most exciting when it comes to kind of Google Cloud and Injective, collaborating on some of these areas?
Good question. First of all, fantastic answer from Rich on the walkthrough, etc. Right? I guess not to be cheesy, but the first thing that really attracted me to Google were the people and their knowledge level of Web3. Right? Even the example Rich just walked through. Right? If you ask someone from a different cloud provider, yes, they might help you instantiate your cloud services. Um, but that's about it. Like, you are just one part of a larger behemoth. I think that was a great word you used earlier. If you go to any of these other providers, right? Because Web3 is not really their focus. You're just part of maybe the person's tech inventory, right? So they're looking after all tech startups within a certain range, right? Like, they're looking after all the Series B tech startups. So you're just bucketed in there. But I think what was really impressive about Google when we started working with them is they're actually knowledgeable about Web3, and they are bullish long term on the industry in terms of making an investment. Because obviously I don't handle Google's finances on the Web3 side. I assume for the first few years it was not really turning a profit, just given like how nascent the industry is. Like, there's not many customers if you really think about it. But they made a very large investment and bet on it and hired, I would say, hundreds of employees, if I'm not mistaken, just for this effort, this broader Web3 or crypto effort. And I think it's paying out in dividends because you see most major companies shifting over to Google. So, and that bodes well for the future, right? Because they're looking far beyond just typical cloud services. Because in my opinion, a lot of the cloud service work is commoditized these days. So the thing, yes, you can host a node on Azure and AWS and Google and probably work pretty much the same way. Um, what you will likely be missing is sort of those bespoke services that you might need, and that timely support, which is key, right? Especially as you're operating a chain, there are billions and billions of dollars being transacted and locked onto the chains on Injective alone, right? So let alone all the other chains combined. And you want to make sure that not only is the service reliable, but when something goes wrong, which inevitably, right, in crypto, something always goes wrong. Even some of the biggest chains halt all the time. You need that support. You need that help, and just having someone there is hugely beneficial. Being able to just give them a ping on Telegram and they're like, "Hey, we're there." That's huge. In terms of where I think things are headed, I think it's exactly what Rich is mentioning, where the service component and the blockchain component become almost invisible, if that's the best word to use it, where we don't necessarily have to understand the inner workings of how these complex systems operate, but we can have everyday users and developers who might not be familiar come and interact and build, right? And that's what you have in Web2, and that's what I think led to the tech boom in general, starting in the late 90s up until even today, where you can have someone who's very rudimentary build an amazing new startup that unlocks billions of dollars in capital and value for the world. I think that component, that step is missing in crypto, where yes, there's a lot of value being created, but it's being created by people who are very, very knowledgeable. And for you to become very knowledgeable and proficient in programming languages and what crypto does, it's just impossible at certain points, right? Like, I've been in this industry for nearly a decade now. Like, I also joined in 2017, kind of like Rich, but I sometimes even I don't know all the jargon people are spewing, right? It's like, okay, you get lost in the weeds. And that's someone who's been in the industry for a long time. So imagine a newcomer coming in, let's say from Facebook or Google. They're a great software engineer, maybe top their class at Stanford, and they get into this space and they're like, holy hell, like, I need to learn all of these things just to be able to create the simplest dApp. And that's what I think leads to a lack of development in the space in general and why we're so behind compared to other counterparts, right? Like think about how fast, relatively, AI is developing compared to crypto, just because they've created these tools or these sets where it makes it easier for developers to come in and operate. And that's like a big part of our vision, right? Why we're launching different VM environments, why we're working with people like Google, where people can come in and build easily. And if we get there, and I think we will, with the intersection of AI, with these broader tool sets that Rich is saying, and also just optimizing the current stacks we have, then you'll really see this blossoming of knowledge and application development in crypto, where it's not only the most intelligent profession of developers building apps, but your everyday people coming in being able to interact. Everyday people who might not know what crypto is or how it works, but they're using payment systems that underneath are reliant on crypto, but people don't have to understand it. I think that's the missing link, and that's my big gripe against crypto in general, where it's beautiful systems and it's beautiful work, but it takes forever to onboard and it takes forever to get used to it. Whereas in Web2, growing up, I never had to learn any of this. Like I was able to use my email or use different apps or play games online, and I never had to know like how it was built. I think, yeah, that's what I think we're headed towards, and I think Google is thinking about it the right way as well.
I want to piggyback off of that because I think there's a couple of points that you made that are just very obvious, but I think not said out loud very often, right? Which is the crypto community, needing to do a better job about welcoming people who, and making it a more welcoming environment for people who are not crypto native, right? I think like that's, if your developer community or your potential developer community, the first time they interact with crypto is like they're losing money in some speculative bet, it becomes very hard to get those people to then invest more time to build, right? And so that's why, when we think about this, the goal is really, how do we create positive, low friction opportunities for engagement with, certainly the crypto native developers benefit from this, but particularly for the non-crypto native developers, right? They need to actually see that there's an opportunity here for them to build and create value and carry forward the vision that they have for the applications that they're building or the problem that they're trying to solve. And I do think that it kind of goes back, almost full circle to the question you asked at the beginning, Rocky, like, why Injective? There are a lot of protocols, there are a lot of foundations. It's always a little alarming or astounding to me. I guess I shouldn't be surprised anymore how few of those foundations focus on the developer experience and really care about it. And not to say that they care about it, but then align their own organizational incentives or other incentives to actually bring about that end, right? Bring about a more hospitable developer experience for not just the crypto native folks, but also we'll call it like the crypto curious. And those are the types of folks that we want to work with for a million different reasons, right? I mean, naturally, if your objective is to build out a more friendly developer environment, like that absolutely has to be your focus. Because as we've seen, like prices don't necessarily, they used to bring more interest, but what I've noticed in the Electric Capital reports over the years is that price and developer interest have actually diverged a little bit. And that can be good and bad. If the price is the only thing that attracts developers and prices are down, then it makes it harder to get more people just in at all. But there is an opportunity where potentially you can attract new developers who view this as, hey, I can only bring my vision to life with these tech primitives. There is no substitute. There are no other alternatives to having open, permissionless, censorship-resistant networks. And I need that for my application. And so I don't really care what the price is. And those are the folks that we need to attract, because then they will come and they will, just like sort of how I thought about the team beginning, they will inject more value than they'll extract. And that absolutely, if this ecosystem is going to take on a bit of a flywheel effect and grow, you need that. You need that at the micro level, which is like each individual contributing more than they take away. You need it at the macro level, which is these organizations, the foundations, or even the Googles of the world coming in, injecting more value than they're taking away. And only when you have that will you build that critical mass of interest and community to actually have this thing take on a life of its own. So I couldn't agree more with what Mirza is saying, and I do think, having been in the space long enough, I think there are ways in which the community is getting better at that. I think there are ways that we can still improve. But I think this conversation goes hand in hand with the investment around the tooling. So you could say this all day long. I mean, people have been talking about community for 10, 15 years, and like, all the way back to Bitcoin. But the alignment of incentives and the focus of the resources hasn't really been a priority until, I would say, recently. And so I do think, like, I'm deeply optimistic about the maturation of the space and the focus on the developer community, particularly in some of the markets where developers are less about chasing price and more about chasing users. And I think that's a really those are good harbingers of what's to come.
Very well put. And I think, your reference to the Electric Capital report, I think, is really telling. If I guess rewind back to 2017, it was very actually correlated with price and developer activity. And so it was like when things crashed, you were like, uh-oh, is this thing still going to be here sort of next cycle? Thankfully it is. And obviously I think we've grown past that. I know we're kind of running up on time. So for the last question, I'd love to ask both of you, and Mirza, maybe I'll let you start here. What is like the end state of blockchains, right? Like I'd like to think we're in kind of still this early adopter phase of adoption. Let's fast forward to kind of this late, adoption phase where, it's mainstream. Everyone from 8 to 80 is using, something on the blockchain. What does that end state look like, Mirza?
It's a good question. And I think me and Rich have both been dancing around it and sort of implying it throughout the way. One, I think there needs to be a clear divorce or separation between the money part of crypto and just being able to use crypto. For example, if you want an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old to use crypto, you can't make money the main barrier to entering the space. It can't cost you $20 to onboard, right? Because right now it kind of does, right? Like you have to create a Coinbase account and you have to withdraw, and the gas fees, like, yeah, before you know it, you're spending $20, which is a lot. And like, how can you onboard people, not just in America, but especially in developing nations, if that's the barrier to entry, right? That's never going to happen. So I think that's step one. And I think we have a long way to go, because a lot of blockchains like Injective have done a really good job of lowering prices, right? But that initial onboarding experience is still quite expensive to go from your centralized sort of counterparts to come onto DeFi. So I think it will need to be a concerted effort with like the exchanges, with on-ramps from banks, etc., where it should be as easy as Venmoing someone to being able to onboard, right? Like the user shouldn't have to take on those fees. I think that's step one. Step two, I think all of the steps, all of the technology needs to be embedded into our daily lives. So let's think about like the core value props of crypto, right? Rich is right. Like one of the first reasons it started is payments, right? So can we see payment rails just operating on crypto without us having to download some new external wallet? Can, for instance, our Venmo app or our Zelle app or our Bank of America app just work on crypto rails without us having to know? The end user benefits because they're getting payments done faster, it's cheaper, but they don't have to know that it's crypto. So I would love to see that. I think we're still a long way away from just acceptance. We're starting to get there. We've come a long way since where we were even like 5-10 years ago. So I think that's another huge bucket for us to fill, because if we can do that, then you immediately have trillions of dollars flowing through crypto without people having to know that it's crypto behind the scenes. Thirdly, I think another huge aspect of crypto has just been yield, right? The big boom that happened in 2020 was just DeFi yield and yield farming, but it was like highly complex to enter into those systems. So having better applications where people are able to reap those yield rewards, right? Similar to how I put money in my Marcus account, or how you earn yield from Wealthfront. If it could be that easy to earn that crypto yield without users having to know, I think that would be huge. And finally, from a developer perspective, being able to onboard and having crypto just be integrated into your daily work and life, I think it starts at a very low level in education, in my opinion, where when CS students are sort of studying and learning how to program, crypto shouldn't be some ancillary course that's taught on the side. It should just be embedded into the proper instruction, because I think that's where you train a lot of the new up and coming developers anyways. So if you familiarize themselves with crypto similar to how they familiarize themselves with front end development or back end development, um, I think that'd be huge, because then you're just training the the next generation to be able to build these applications similar to how they know how to build websites. So I know these are like huge goals, but I think that's the end state where it's sort of silent and invisible and everyone's interacting with it. Everyone's able to build on it without all of these obstacles in our way.
Very interesting. Rich, do you mind sort of summing up? I know you've kind of dropped sort of hints here and there, but yeah, I would love to learn from you what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the abstraction away of the technology is really a critical point, right? No one says I'm starting an internet business today, and if they did, I would probably run the other way. And I think the end state is when people say, "Hey, look, I'm starting whatever, a social media company, or I'm starting a fintech company, or I'm starting a collectibles company, or a retail business, or gaming," and they're using blockchain primitives under the hood, tokenization, distributed ledgers, etc. But that's not the central focus of their pitch. And once that starts to happen, it's sort of like what happens now. Like nobody's really asking, like, "Hey, how did you build this app that I use on my phone? Are you using Java? Is it C++? Is it this? Is it that?" Like no one cares. And so I think that's where, once you've done that as an ecosystem, then we know we've kind of hit this point where, okay, these things have become so abstracted away from the user and so native to the developer experience, as Mirza sort of mentioned earlier, that it is not a selling point that something is built in and of itself on a blockchain. Instead, the selling point is that this app solves a problem and happens to use blockchain underneath the hood. So I think that is, 100% like where I view the end state. I think the really like a good analogy or just like a quick kind of maybe anecdote is when we started to build faucets, people were kind of like, well, why would you build faucets? It's very commoditized. People don't really invest in the faucets that much. And to Mirza's point about onboarding, like it makes zero sense. Like it's actually kind of funny to me that people scratch their heads like, I don't know why we're not getting new developers. The first thing you're doing as a developer in any new protocol is you are dripping from a testnet faucet. And oftentimes there are a bunch of hoops that you have to jump through. One of which is I have to spend money, as Mirza sort of alluded to. I have to go buy a native token just to overcome the abuse mechanism, the abuse resistance mechanism of the faucet, so that it knows I'm a real person, not a bot. Like, so automatically, like the faucet is your front door to your protocol. And like you've given people essentially like a Rube Goldberg machine to figure out how they have to put their email in, or the email doesn't work, then the reCAPTCHA fails, then they have to go buy the token. So they're going to Coinbase. If they don't have a Coinbase account, they're like, okay, maybe I'll try Uniswap and go to a DEX. I mean, it is just ridiculous. And so that was one of the reasons why we focused on it, because it's oftentimes these top of funnel initiatives that get, I would say, like become victim of the tragedy of the commons. Oh, it's super easy to do. No one cares about it. And we found that if you built a really delightful experience, and that was the developer's first interaction with the protocol, they were far more likely to go do other things. So developers come to the portal and they start with the faucet, but those who get a drip are far more likely to click on some of the offerings from our partners, whether it's the Node APIs or the Wallet APIs or any of the other things. They're far more likely to click on and go through the learning content. They're far more likely to interact with the AI than someone who just comes to the portal and doesn't do anything. So I absolutely think we need to do a better job. And this is, part of the work that we're doing with Injective is like, how do we create that experience in a delightful way? And again, in some ways, make it invisible for those developers, or at least frictionless. So I think, the faucet's the first step. The rest of the house needs to get built out. And we're slowly doing that with our partners, and excited to see how that matures over time.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to end on, you guys. Again, thank you guys for just your insightful answers and showing up today to kind of give people an idea of sort of where we're headed, where we're going in this small but but very mighty community. And so, with that being said, Mirza, Rich, thank you guys for being here. Super appreciate it, and hopefully the audience got some great insight. And Rich, come back anytime. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have an episode 2 follow up for once some of these ideas that you've kind of put out there have kind of come to fruition, and we'd love to revisit and see if your predictions were right, and kind of go from there. So again, thank you guys for being here, and looking forward to following up here shortly.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rich. Bye.
Thank you.